Paul Samuelson poderia ter se aposentado em 1970, quando ganhou o Prêmio Nobel de Economia. Ele foi o primeiro americano. Naquela época, já estava rico só com os direitos do seu Economics, o livro didático de economia mais adotado no país. Está na 16ª edição e já vendeu mais de 4 milhões de exemplares. Hoje, com 83 anos, Paul Samuelson está forte e rijo. Trabalha 4 dias por semana no seu escritório da Faculdade de Economia do MIT, o Instituto de Tecnologia de Massachusetts, onde foi o criador do curso de pós-graduação. Ele também é professor visitante da New York University, faz conferências e escreve. Nesta carreira de mais de 60 anos como economista, Samuelson mudou de opinião. Durante muito tempo acreditava que a economia da União Soviética crescia mais do que a americana. Ele dava pouca importância ao volume do dinheiro em circulação e ao Banco Central. Preferia governos intervencionistas e reguladores. Essa entrevista foi dividida em 2 partes. Nesta primeira, ele examina a saúde da economia americana e as relações econômicas dos Estados Unidos com o resto do mundo.
So let's begin by the United States. I mean, for every person you meet, every analyst you meet saying that it's going to be fine, the future is going to be good, you find one that's very pessimistic about the next 2 or 3 years. What's your pulse on the situation?
I think we're at a time like 1930. In 1930, that followed the great stock market crash of 1929. It actually was a year of mild recession. But people did not know whether in the next year there would be a recovery or whether it would get worse. And in fact, it did get worse. And in fact, the stock market got worse. The global economy got worse. And it's like a fork in the roads. Economics is not an exact science. We can only deal with evidence, with probabilities. And I think the bulk of the probability is that growth rate of the U.S. in 1999 will slow down.
2.5?
Or 1 3/4. I was at a meeting at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, one of the 12.
Yeah.
It was an academic consultants meeting, and the tone there was not dramatically frightened, but it was thought that there would be a slowdown in, particularly in the manufacturing sector.
And the reason for the slowdown would be?
Would be, in an important way, that the exchange rate depreciations abroad, particularly in the wake of the Asian financial collapse, has made costs very competitive. And we see that already in our balance of payments. The United States is turning out to be a very good neighbor. We are absorbing a tremendous amount of exports from abroad. You would have been surprised 50 years ago to believe that this could have happened without protectionism. And moreover, we've been a better neighbor in this regard than Europe has. The European market is somewhat open, but not in the way that the American market is. But so that's one part of it. Now, that's bad and it's good. It's good because it helps us on any inflation problem. The prices are kept down by plentiful supplies from abroad. It would be bad if a 2%, 1.5% rate of growth were to go down to a 0% and we were to go into a recession. But we think that the Federal Reserve has weapons. It has the credit policy weapons. It knows how to use those weapons. And under the last two chairmen of the Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker and now Alan Greenspan, the Federal Reserve has actually used its powers. That's not true of the Bank of Japan. They've had a whole decade of stagnation. It was always, in their case, too little and too late. Now,
but it's a different economy. It's much. I think it's harder in Japan for the Federal Reserve to do the change that the power that the Fed has here is.
Well, right now, the Bank of Japan has no power because the interest rates are so very low, a quarter of 1%. It reminds me back to my student days in 1938, when the U.S. Treasury bills had a yield of 3/8 of 1%, or 3/8 of 3/8 of 1%, and we were in what was called a liquidity trap. If a central bank like the Bank of Japan does not do the right things promptly and lets things get worse and worse, you could get into a similar situation. But our interest rate now is in the 5% level, and so there's still room for action. But let me make an important point. I never talk as an American patriot. I don't say America is so big, so beautiful, so wise that things can't happen here. I'm always learning lessons in Thailand, in Brazil, which I bring home to America. So there is no such thing as being too big to fail. And if we do not handle the situation properly, if we do what Herbert Hoover, as president, did in 1928 to 1933,
which was
paralysis of action, to believe that the capitalistic system has an automatic gyroscope which will stabilize itself. Now, you understand, you're talking to one economist. There are many economists like me, but there are economists who don't see exactly the way I do. So I'm sure if you were to talk to the late Professor Friedrich Hayek of Austria, you'd have to dig him out of the cemetery to talk to him. But you might go out to California, and the Professor Emeritus from the University of Chicago, Professor Milton Friedman. And I dare say if you were to ask him the same question that you're asking me,
he would disagree with you.
He would disagree, and he would say, well, all that the Federal Reserve should do is have an automatic pilot. It should not use its own discretion, its own intelligence, because politicians will always do the wrong thing. Now, I think that particular philosophy has worked very badly in the last few decades, and it's interesting that the last two Federal Reserve chairmen have been conservative individuals. Alan Greenspan is a very conservative man, but he also is a very well-informed person and also a very intelligent person, and he has acted. And Paul Volcker was the one who ended the rather serious recession of 1982 by acting. So in economics, you only get what you do. If the Japanese talk about recovery, that means nothing.
Professor, 1930, that's the beginning of the first semester. The U.S. was coming out of the crash and a huge depression.
No,
And
the crash and the Great Depression are not the
not
same
the same thing. I'm sorry.
One
Yeah.
is an overture
Right.
to the other.
But you are the difference from the 30s is that you are now doing one, I think, the second longest period of prosperity. The first, the longest one was 61, 69, if I'm
We
not...
say it's the longest peacetime because in Vietnam War, the Kennedy was really longer. But we say, well, there was the escalation of the Vietnam War, and that doesn't count. Now, there's a difference, and part of the difference is what I've stressed: the changed ideology. We live in a mixed economy. I was born in a pure capitalist economy. First 15 years of my life, there were no unions, essentially. The president, Coolidge, before Hoover, he's the last president who would take naps in the White House. He was a very inactive, let the system run itself. Well, I think there's a great deal of evidence from economic history that the mixed society, in which most of the business of the production of goods and the distribution of goods takes place under the market mechanism,
Right.
but with the government as a referee, rules of the road, and secondly, any pure market system will create two things. It will create, with all likelihood, great inequality. And secondly, it will create occasional great instability. There is no macro efficiency of the overall bond market, stock market. It's without a rudder if it is left to itself. And self-regulation will not handle the problem.
So the government has to be a strong regulator as well?
The government has a function, and it's very wrong to discuss these things as if you were on the sport page of the newspaper. Stalin against capitalism, and capitalism won. So pure capitalism is the best system. Pure command is the worst system possible. That is not the way I look at the world. I look at the world as what is the golden mean of compromise between most of the decisions being done in the marketplace, done in terms of profit and loss. Notice, I didn't say profit, because my teacher, Joseph Schumpeter, always spoke of capitalism as a system of creative destruction. It's very hard on the people who are losing their jobs when the system is adjusting to new inventions and to new situations. But if you don't allow those adjustments to be made, you will not have dynamic progress. And so I say, I can preach economics of the heart just because I use a cold head and I stick to the facts and work out what the most likely effect of things will be, using economic history as my guide, using the best economic theory we can find as my guide. I think wishful thinking will never run an economy. But a warm heart can be used to modify the worst excesses that would otherwise take place under the system I was born in.
You talk about unemployment and poverty.
Yes. Now, lots of the problems of inequality are not such that a government can cure them. A government cannot make people be educated. If there's a history of illiteracy, a government cannot, by passing a higher minimum wage, create an egalitarian society. In fact, if I could say so, permit me to say this kindly, that was almost the Latin American pattern that we call sometimes Peronism, in which a populist democracy elects a strong leader, and that strong leader may overnight decree a 40% increase in nominal wages. What has been the pattern in Argentina, in Brazil, in Peru, down the line? No nation has ever increased its real wage in a short period of time by 20%,
by decree.
much less 40% by decree. The result is that the printing press needs to be turned, and I have known good friends, students of mine from Latin America, who in their whole lifetime only experienced hyperinflation. Their father only remembered in inflation. Now, this is interesting because in 1945, if you had come to me, interviewing me, there was no television, and said, Professor Samuelson, you are already a world leader in economic research. What part of the world do you think will grow fastest in the next 25 years?
Soviet Union. No. What would you have said?
I would have said probably Argentina.
Why?
Probably Chile. Why? It has a good climate. It has relatively little of a heterogeneous race problem inside itself, partly because the natives, as in the U.S., were killed off in an earlier century, and it is always easier to imitate the leaders, to import technology. It's like a bicycle race. The first bicyclist must break the wind for the followers, and that's different. So I would have said there'll be a catch-up, because Argentina, 50 years earlier, I would have said, is going to be the leading place, and it didn't do it then. So now the time is ripe. Now, what happened? It actually was one of the worst areas in terms of the economic almanac of growth if you leave out Africa and Asia. And when I try to diagnose that, I come always to politics, to the fact that you start out with a great deal of inequality. You had no playing the rules of the pure capitalism game or the mixed economy game.
We're talking about Brazil, the inequality, or because Argentina didn't have that much inequality. Argentina was a more the gap between the rich and the poor was never so huge as it is in Brazil.
Well, of course, Brazil also has a more heterogeneous population by background. I always tell my friends, the Swedish economists, these are the ones who award Nobel Prizes. You don't understand a country like the United States. Sweden is so homogeneous. Japan is so homogeneous. In the United States, a minimum wage, which is harmless in New England, does a great deal of harm in Mississippi. And Brazil is more like the United States. Now, things have changed. The U.S. in this 1990s, the whole decade, has done better than any of the other most advanced industrial countries.
And why it happened?
I told you we were lucky in our choice of
the Federal Reserve.
Okay. However, they couldn't have done it alone. The American labor force has shown something that nobody predicted. I didn't predict it 15 years ago. None of my colleagues did. Great flexibility. The American worker, when he loses a job because there's downscaling of the big 500 Fortune corporations, the mergers, cannot get as good a job anywhere. So what they do is they accept a more mediocre job.
Right.
Now, why is that a good thing? Because Professor Samuelson has no warm heart? Because he doesn't want
I don't understand
people
that.
to get good jobs. It's because it's better to accept the mediocre jobs that are available at market-clearing wage rates than to hold out for the kind of jobs. And now I'll give you the glaring opposite. Spain.
No.
In the post-Franco days, today it's prosperous. For Spain, that means 18% unemployment.
Right.
It dropped from 22 to 24%. There's a whole group of workers in Spain who have their jobs. If the unemployment rate went from 18% to 30%, that wouldn't touch their jobs. That's the setup. Then why should they be reasonable? Why should they agree to new methods of work?
Right.
And so the U.S. working force, without anybody predicting it, in fact, economists were asleep while this was happening, have become extremely flexible. Now, I can tell you, I train top economists here at MIT. I've done that for 50 years now. These are the people who become Federal Reserve chairman. It's very hard to be a Federal Reserve chairman in the 1970s when there is stagflation. You know what stagflation is?
It's a
combination at the same time you have high unemployment and inflation. That's not what the U.S. labor market is like today. Because of Japanese competition first, then competition from Singapore, from South Korea, from Taiwan, American workers realize if they hold out for very high wages, they might keep their job for 6 months, but that speeds up the rate at which that activity moves different place. Now, it's not just international, because I've been teaching in New England for almost 60 years.
Right.
And all the time that I've been teaching here, the south of the United States, which was the lower wage area, has been attracting first the textile industry, then the shoe industry, then the paper industry. So what's been happening abroad is also happening at home. Now, that's ruthless. You know, you're 45 years old, you've been in a job for 20 years, you've developed a certain skill, and suddenly, because two big firms merge, you're fired. Are you going to do nothing for the rest of your life from 45?
I agree with you. It's not demeaning, but if a person who is 45 years old and has been on a job, let's say making $40,000, $50,000 a year, then he's forced to work for $12,000 a year, $15,000 a year.
Sometimes, yes.
So this, you think that?
What I think is that it is better for the total economy, and it's better for the individuals in the economy to be realistic. And this is my point. It makes the job very easy for Chairman Alan Greenspan, because he used to always run into the if he has just reduced interest rates 3 times. That's in order to keep our prosperity going. In the old days, that would have sent up
inflation
prices, and then he has to cut down. We're now going more than 80 months. We're talking in decade-length terms, whereas the old expansions used to last about 4 years, 4.5 years. They're now beginning to last 8 to 10 years. And the future is always longer than the present.
Yeah.
A mixed economy often must undergo austerity for periods of time. Now, if that austerity is pointless, endless, and leads to nothing but heavy unemployment anyway, then you'll have the class struggle, you'll have tremendous resistance. But the flexible economy is the way that the children and the younger brothers of these people who have lost their good jobs, maybe they were a little bit lucky to have had these very, very good jobs, they, with numerical literacy, so they can handle computers, that's going to be a very big division between two kinds of people. So unfortunately, I don't want you to think that I'm describing utopia, because the new have-nots and the haves are based upon educational opportunity and educational handicap from the very beginning. That kind of stratification, if you're going to try to break it, requires flexibility, but it also requires compassion.
Na semana que vem, Samuelson vai nos dizer por que todas as manhãs ele reza pelo Brasil.